So I told my 6th grade son to drop an F-bomb at school. And by the way, we needed to practice at home on his delivery because he's not the type to curse. In fact, back in 3rd grade, he was convincing his classmates not to. He's got the best heart in the world, spontaneously helps old ladies with their groceries at the grocery store. He's that kid. So we had to practice him delivering an F-bomb so that he could do it effectively at school. And why would I do this? Why would I send him off to school with this particular instruction? And the short answer to that question is bullying. See, I know all too well that bullying starts in about the 6th grade. It's when the would-be bullies start to group together and start deciding who their victims are going to be for the next few years. A lot of times the victim's just going to be that kid with obvious irregularities. Physical, social, financial, some point of weakness from the bully's perspective that he can constantly point out to say, I'm better than you. Now I know this firsthand because for about 8 years I was that victim. Because the other classification the bullies use to choose their victims is that they choose the people who don't push back. Now my dad wasn't around for a while in my early years, and I didn't learn how to fight, and for some reason I am just that peaceful kid until you push me just a little too far. And my threshold for putting up with the bullshit of the world is pretty darn high. But the problem is, when I was in 6th grade, it was pretty darn high. Plus there was the fear of me pushing back against a group of folks, and so I didn't want my son to fall into that pattern at all. And I know my son is one of those loving creatures who just won't want to push back, and that's going to make him their intended victim, and that's going to make him sad, and that's going to sap his power. So we discussed how to deal with this hourly victimization that my son was experiencing in every class that he was having with these kids. Now in 6th grade it starts light with just verbal abuse, and even though he's one of the smartest kids in the class, every hour that they saw him, you're so stupid, you're such a dork, you're so annoying. And so in order to nip that shit in the bud before it gets out of control and years later we're dealing with it, I didn't tell him to go to the teacher and be that little narc that's going to get more retribution. I told him this. I said, the next word out of their mouth that is offensive to you, say this. I want you to look that kid straight in the eye, and I want you to hold that stare, and I want you to say this: shut the fuck up, David. And the main bully's name really isn't David, but we're going to use it here. And at first he was like, whoa. And then he comes up with all the excuses of the stuff that David's going to say to make his shut up meaningless. At which point we went through the singular comeback that he needed to deal with anything that David would say after. Shut the fuck up, David. Blah, 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 blah. You're not big enough to talk to me like that. And then hold that stare and communicate your resolve. And I knew that little pushback was all that David would need to say to himself, yeah, Declan's not going to be that victim. And sure enough, it worked. That day he told David to shut the fuck up and that he wasn't big enough to talk to my son like that. And David has since started being cool to my son. And my son will now have that open door to be a positive influence in David's life and reduce the amount of bullying he exhibits. Just like he got everybody in 3rd grade to not cuss. Because there's a big difference between being a peacenik pansy to a peaceful fucking warrior that'll kick your ass if you get out of line. Somebody once said, I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. You can be peaceful without being weak. And in this world, you'd be amazed at how many people want to try to victimize you, and you'd be even more amazed at how easily they'll give up that victimization if you push back on them just a little bit. So maybe quit taking so much shit and go push back a little bit, huh?